the recreation in this Soviet propaganda film from the 1960s. Batista had learned of Castro's plan. The Granma, the dilapidated yacht Castro used as a landing ship, was trapped under fire. After days of trudging through swamps and rugged hills, only 12 of Castro's original 82 men made it safely to the mountains of the Sierra Maestra of southeastern Cuba. Among the 12 were Castro, his brother Raul, and Che Guevara, who had been wounded by government troops. As demonstrations continued in the streets of Havana and Santiago de Cuba, Castro's group learned to survive in the mountains and jungles. For Castro, it was the happiest period of his life. Traveling through rural areas, he promised Cubans a modern society free from poverty. This promise appealed to many in Cuba's polarized society. As his forces grew in strength and numbers, he relied on two people: Che, who had proven to be a resilient fighter, and Celia Sanchez, one of only two women to hold an important position in Castro's movement. Castro had already divorced Mirta, his first wife. Celia Sanchez became his private secretary, his confidant, and for a time, his lover. Castro's bravado and gregarious manner caught the attention of the international press. This 1957 New York Times article proved that Castro had not died in combat, as Batista claimed. On the contrary, his guerrilla campaign continued to gain strength. A rebel radio was established in early 1958. Broadcasts reached as far as Venezuela in South America and helped spread the news of Castro's growing rebellion. That summer, Batista launched an assault against the rebels. But Castro's men had the upper hand. They knew the terrain and had cultivated the support of the local people. The government offensive was quickly thwarted by Castro. As the anti-Batista campaign gained strength, Castro's movement also gained credibility in the international community. Here, his brother Raul is seen shaking hands with the CIA station chief in Cuba. The rebels began their final push for victory in August 1958. Even Castro was surprised when Batista fled the country for the Dominican Republic on January 1st, 1959. Speaking at every town, city, and crossroads where people gathered to hear him, it took Castro over a week to travel from Santiago de Cuba to claim victory in the capital, Havana. More than 1 million people welcomed the supreme leader upon his arrival. Years earlier, he had been unable to win a student election. Now, university students marched through the streets of Havana behind the banner of Castro's July 26th movement. People crowded in to listen as their new leader addressed the island nation of 7 million people. As Castro spoke, a dove landed on his shoulder. According to Afro-Cuban beliefs, it was a sign that Castro had been divinely selected for his mission. Fidel Castro, the new leader of Cuba, was just 32 years old. Revolutionary leader Fidel Castro was quickly elevated to the status of a god by some parts of the Cuban population. But when he assumed power in 1959, he had few plans and little experience relevant to running a country almost completely dependent on agriculture and tourism. Perhaps more comfortable while on the move as a guerrilla fighter, Castro's initial attempts at running the government were haphazard and impromptu. He kept several residences in Havana, but no official office. The public knew little of Castro's personal life. On the outside, his homes were distinguished only by the soldiers who guarded them. Inside, they reflected the unconventional lifestyle of a married man, again turned bachelor. He rarely saw Fidelito, the son he had during his marriage to Mirta Diaz-Balart. Having suffered himself at Batista's hands, Castro oversaw the purges of those who had served under his predecessor. The people demanded justice against the authorities who had shot down Cubans in the streets without trial and who tortured others to death in Batista's prisons. Revolutionary courts were established. Public trials were held, at which children were called upon to denounce family members for crimes committed under the old regime. The trials pitted family members against each other. The prisons began to fill. The death penalty, which even Castro had been spared after his first attempt to overthrow the government, was reinstated. In less than 2 years, nearly 600 people were sentenced to death and executed. But Castro, with his warm, reassuring eloquence, remained a hero to many of the people. Appearing at baseball games, he maintained his image as a man of the people rather than a dictator over them. In 1960, Cuba was, as it had been for many years, predominantly dependent on agriculture. Much of the country's farmland was divided into large foreign-owned plantations. Intending to address the long-standing inequality of Cuba's economy, Castro banned farms of over 1,000 acres. 40% of the land was seized and redistributed among the rural population. Small farmers responded enthusiastically. Their raised machete became as much a symbol of the revolution as the guerrilla's machine gun had been. But the confiscation of land owned by foreigners was troubling to the U.S. government. Suspicion grew even further when Castro hosted the Soviet Vice Premier Anastas Mikoyan. At the time of Mikoyan's visit, the United States and the Soviet Union were engaged not only in the Cold War, but also a space race, which had heightened the tension and competition between the Eastern and Western superpowers. Mikoyan's visit included a meeting with Cuba's most notorious American resident. The Nobel Prize-winning author Ernest Hemingway had lived in Havana for 18 years.